At the end of the day, seeing Batman fight on the big screen will always be at least a little bit funny. In one corner, we have a man caked in glam rock eyeshadow, and in the other, we have Danny Devito absolutely covered up in prosthetics. Movies, gotta love them. Batman's Rogue Gallery is a circus of colorful and obscure designs. Let's find out how some of those foes were put on screen. When casting a big-name star in a villain role, the very last thing a production would want to do is hide the actor's face. Come on, can you imagine a movie studio covering a terrifying elastic face?
You know how much I sacrificed?
When Jack Nicholson signed on for the role of Joker in Tim Burton's Batman, the production team worked at great lengths to augment his natural features. The makeup department asked Jack to pull the most extreme smile he could, and as you could imagine from Nicholson, he devilishly grinned from ear to ear, and thus the base cast was formed. From there, the face casts were meticulously drawn over as the production team tried to strike the perfect balance between an everlasting grin and one that activated to even more exaggerated proportions when a smile was performed by Jack. While not quite a prosthetic, I feel like I have to talk about that face paint trick. To make it look like Jack's flesh tone was disappearing to reveal the acid-burned skin, a layer of white face paint was completed with silicone oil on top. A flesh tone grease paint was then dabbled over the original paints, and since silicone oil has a hard time sticking to, well, anything, it naturally removed the additional layer of the grease paint, revealing the original layer of face paint. Not gonna lie, I feel like I just ruined a great magic trick. For the Penguin in Batman Returns, tons of meticulous fine-tuning was done on top of Danny DeVito's face cast to find the perfect balance of prosthetic and natural facial expression. The prosthetic for the character was fairly simple, being but a brow piece with a connected nose and upper lip. This allowed for Danny's eye and jaw movements to be entirely unhindered when acting. For how little prosthetics were used, the daily application on set turned out to be an issue. It had to be applied very specifically or else it would be noticeably lopsided, and the glue used to hold it together was freezing cold.
Could be worse. My nose could be gushing blood.
Essentially, the application of the makeup turned Danny himself into a shivering little penguin. Another fascinating little tidbit was the tar-looking drool that was constantly pouring from his mouth. Turns out it was a mixture of mouthwash with red and green food dye. Add in some false teeth and you've got quite the terrifying man. Although we would argue that even without the makeup, Frank from It's Always Sunny is way more terrifying. When the 2016 Suicide Squad won the Academy Award for Best Makeup, the internet unanimously erupted, citing how insane it was that a movie containing Jared Leto's face tattoos won. As absurd as they were, Adewale Akinnuoye-Agbaje's prosthetics that turned him into Killer Croc was nothing short of absolutely stunning, and makeup designer Alessandro Bortolazzi deserves all the praise as a result. To achieve the textured scales, prosthetics were applied to Adewale's head, shoulders, and chest, with the rest of his stomach painted with makeup. A wild little tidbit, all this was happening over the course of 5 hours, starting at 3 a.m., while Adewale was listening to Cannibal Confession tapes. While this specific version of Croc never got to meet Batman on screen, I'd love it if instead he joined some sort of Suicide Squad B team led by King Shark. Throw in Cheetah and Weasel, and you've got one heck of a freak show. When they were designing the '89 Joker, the design team worked with the philosophy that the performer should shine through the makeup. You should still be able to tell who the actor is. What we've seen so far of Colin Farrell and Matt Reeves' upcoming The Batman, well, that's an entirely different story. His take on Oswald Cobblepot could easily be confused for Richard Kind and looks all kinds of crazy. I'm gonna be honest, not much is known about the prosthetics or the role just yet, but we do know that Joe Grover, Goran Lundstrom, and Michael Marino are doing the prosthetics, and each of those guys have deep portfolios with films like Guardians of the Galaxy and The Wolfman under their belts.
You wanna know how I got these scars?
Actually, we do know how you got those scars. It was all John Caglione Jr. To ground the historically goofy character of the Joker into the Nolan verse, changes needed to be made to the makeup of the Joker while still maintaining the character's essence. John Caglione had previously worked on Dick Tracy, where he got to create some pretty grotesque mob bosses. While these villains were, over the top to say the least, the gruesome nature of the prosthetics inspired Ledger's Joker's smile. Caglione has said that the prosthetics were styled to be a horrible self-inflicted injury. The blurred and mismatched scars to Heath's smile was in reference to Francis Bacon, whose artwork is similarly warped. Seeing these images, you might actually recognize the style. That's because the Joker spared one of Francis's pieces in the 1989 museum raid. There are, many things you could say about Batman Forever, but Schumacher's campy aesthetic definitely stands out throughout the years. The prosthetics used to turn Tommy Lee Jones into Two-Face kind of looks like a piece of chewed up bubblegum, but that's not necessarily the worst look possible. The scarred pieces were sculpted by the great Rick Baker, who is responsible for pretty much every bit of genuinely amazing special makeup effects from American Werewolf in London to How the Grinch Stole Christmas. Like when his Batman Forever co-star donned the Grinch costume, where Jim Carrey had to be trained for torture resistance by a Navy SEAL, Tommy Lee also had to have a grueling amount of hours in the makeup chair, with a 5 a.m. call time every morning, which led to a consistent 4-hour-long application process. Hey, thankfully, he only needed to get half of his face done up. Okay, I know this list is a little bit Joker heavy, but hey, he's appeared in like every Batman adaptation on both film and television. This time around, we need to talk about Cameron Monaghan, who was an absolute diamond in the rough during his time on Gotham. Around the time of the series' development was also DC's attempt at relaunching its comics lore with the New 52. In a gnarly tribute to the then recent Detective Comics run, Cameron received a similar face-off. Michael Maddy had designed a 2-layer silicone mask to pull off the effect, one with the nervous system and one with the dead skin designed to live over top. By having the two different masks, a simple practical effect formed, where no matter how the top layer was stapled, the exposed bloody layer would always be able to peek out in different, haunting ways. It goes without saying that Vincent Price is a horror icon. Perhaps his most fascinating villain? Egghead?
Can I offer you a nice egg in this trying time?
When we say Egghead, you might think it's some obscure spin-off of Coneheads, and honestly, the prosthetics behind Jeff Bezos from the Adam West Batman series is extremely similar. It's just an elongated bald cap technique, but what's pretty insane is this guy isn't even from the comics. Yeah, there's some pretty obscure DC villains out there like Polka Dot Man and Condiment King, but just knowing that these showrunners created the villain because of the prosthetics is just great. Egghead stands out across the massive rogues gallery of the 60s Batman because he's one of the only villains to prominently feature prosthetics in that series. The only other applications of makeup were through exaggerated eyebrows that gave off that villainy arc of the brow. When it came time to turn Uma Thurman into Poison Ivy in Batman and Robin, they took that eyebrow idea and ran with it. While I would have loved to see an Audrey 2-like puppeteered plant following her around, the plot called for her character to be a seductress, limiting the amount of prosthetic possibilities, which left the creative solution of having the vine-like eyebrows to tie the fairly generic costume together. Bane in The Dark Knight Rises exploited Nolan's own personal weakness: sound mixing. As it turns out, Bane uses prosthetics, that is through the headgear he dons. While not as complex or specific as, say, fixing the upper lip onto Danny Devito, the dimensions for the mask had to be perfect, which meant Tom Hardy had to undergo various headcasts to have a mask that fixed onto his big, bald head just right. I mean, it looks pretty cool, but of course the sound dampening of the mask sparked tons of controversy when the first bit of footage played in front of IMAX showings of Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol.
No one cared who I was until I put on the mask.
Turns out the only impossible mission was deciphering what Bane was saying. Okay, I'll show myself out after that one. But seriously, where is the live-action Clayface? Well, I'm sure it would probably end up being a CGI beast. I think some beautifully hideous prosthetic work can be incorporated. Think of the face melting in Raiders. Ah, man, that would be amazing.
Not my worst review.